$187,340. That's the number I didn't know existed until I was 31 years old, sitting in a credit union parking lot in my car, staring at a printout a loan officer named Denise had just handed me across her desk, with a look on her face like she was handing me a live grenade. $187,340. Taken from a trust my father set up for me before he died. Taken over 11 years. Taken by the one person every single relative in my family would have sworn on a stack of Bibles could never do something like this. My mother. For over a decade, my mother told my aunts, my cousins, my grandmother, my own brother, that I was unwell, that I was paranoid, that I had episodes. She had a whole vocabulary for it. Soft, concerned, loving words that one by one walled me off from every person who might have asked the one question that would have ended this in year one. Wait, where did all that money go? They thought they got away with it. They were wrong. This is the story of how I went from the unstable one at every Thanksgiving table to the person holding a folder of bank records, forensic accounting reports, and a criminal case number that would make my mother's carefully built reputation collapse in a single afternoon, in front of the very family she spent 11 years turning against me. If you're new here, welcome. Every week on this channel, I tell true stories of financial betrayal. People who trusted the wrong person with their money, and what it actually took to get every single dollar back. Today's story is about greed, betrayal, and the specific quiet cruelty of a parent who realized that if she controlled the narrative about her child, she could control the money without anyone ever checking her math. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe people should not get away with this, hit subscribe now because you are going to want to see how this one ends. Let's get into it. I need to back up because you can't understand how someone gets away with something for 11 years without understanding the stage it happened on. I grew up the middle child in a large extended family, the kind with 40 people at Christmas, group texts that never stopped buzzing, and a matriarchal structure where my mother, Linda, was the unofficial center of gravity. She organized the holidays. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She was, by every outward measure, the family's emotional infrastructure. My father, Richard, died when I was 19. He'd built a modest but real nest egg, a life insurance payout, some investment accounts, proceeds from selling his share of a hardware business he co-owned with his brother. The total after his death came to just over $240,000. He left the bulk of it to me and my two siblings in a trust, to be administered by my mother as trustee until we each turned 30. For our protection, the estate attorney explained, so a 19-year-old doesn't blow it on a car. That clause, the one meant to protect me, is the exact clause my mother would spend the next decade exploiting. Here's what almost nobody in my family knew, including me, for years. A trustee has a fiduciary duty. That's a legal term you'll hear a lot in this video. It means the person managing someone else's money is legally required to act solely in that person's best interest, to keep clear records, and to avoid any transaction that benefits the trustee personally. Breaching that duty isn't just unethical. Depending on the state and the amount, it can be prosecuted as embezzlement, theft by a fiduciary, or fraud. My mother knew none of the rest of the family understood that language. She used that gap. The first withdrawals were small and explainable. $1,200 here for trust administration fees, a real thing trustees can sometimes charge, but she had no attorney, no accountant, no basis for that number. $3,000 there, logged in a shoebox ledger as educational expenses for a semester of community college textbooks that in reality cost me $340, which I paid myself out of pocket working at a call center. By the time I was 22, over $40,000 had already moved out of that trust. Looking back, the red flags were everywhere. And I want to name them here because if you're watching this and something feels familiar, I want you to trust that feeling. Red flag 1. She controlled all communication with the estate attorney. Anytime I asked to see the trust documents, she'd say, "I'll set up a call." And the call never happened. I was 20, then 21, then 23. Busy, trusting. It's easy to let later become never when the person stalling you is your mother. Red flag 2. She reframed every question I asked as an attack. If I said, "Hey, can I see a statement?" she'd get quiet, then say something like, "I can't believe you'd accuse me of something after everything I've sacrificed for this family." The conversation would end with me apologizing. That's a pattern called DARVO: deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. And it is one of the most common tools financial abusers inside families use to shut down scrutiny. Red flag 3. She started talking to other people about me before I ever confronted her. My aunt would mention out of nowhere, "Your mom says you've been really stressed lately, sweetie. Are you doing okay?" I hadn't said a word to my aunt about being stressed. My mother was preloading the narrative. If I ever did try to raise the money question publicly, the family would already have a frame ready. He's not doing well right now. Red flag 4, every big financial year for her lined up suspiciously with a personal purchase. A new kitchen the year I turned 24, a paid-off SUV the year I turned 26, a family vacation to Cabo for everyone except me because I wasn't in a good place to travel. None of these alone would have been proof of anything. Together, they were a pattern. But I didn't see the pattern yet because I didn't have the one thing that turns a bad feeling into a case: documents. When I turned 25, I asked, calmly in writing over email so there'd be a record, for a full accounting of the trust, as I was legally entitled to as a beneficiary. In most states, a trustee is required to provide beneficiaries with an annual accounting on request. It's not optional, it's the law. My mother's response 3 days later was not a financial document. It was a phone call from my Aunt Carol. "Honey," she said, "your mom's worried about you. She said you sent her a really aggressive email about money. Is everything okay? Are you sleeping?" That was the moment my mother stopped just delaying me. That was the moment she started building a case. Not a legal one, but a social one. That the real problem in this family wasn't a trustee who wouldn't produce records. It was a son who couldn't be trusted to understand them. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the whole engine of the story. She didn't need to hide the theft from the family. She needed to make sure the family would never believe me over her if the theft ever came to light. And for the next 6 years, that's exactly what she built. Quietly, patiently, one worried phone call at a time. By the time I was 27, I noticed something has shifted at family gatherings. Conversations would pause slightly when I walked in. My cousin Jamie stopped inviting me to the annual lake trip. Later, I'd learned my mother told her I'd been having a hard time and might not want to be around a lot of people. My grandmother started asking me gently if I was taking care of myself, in a tone reserved for people managing an illness. I was not managing an illness. I was managing a growing, nameless dread that something was wrong with my money. And every time I tried to talk about it, I got treated like the problem was my mental state. This is a tactic financial abusers use that has a name in the field of elder and family financial exploitation: isolation as concealment. If the people around the victim are gradually convinced the victim is unreliable, any accusation they eventually make lands as a symptom, not a fact. The trust was structured to fully distribute to me at 30. I turned 30 in March. By June, I still hadn't received a dime, or a document, or a return call. I hired my first attorney that summer, a modest retainer, $2,500, all I could scrape together, an estate litigation attorney named Priya Chandrasekaran, who specialized in trustee disputes. Her first question was simple: "Do you have the original trust document?" I didn't. My mother did. And when Priya's office formally requested it, along with the legally required accounting, we got back a 2-page letter from a lawyer I'd never heard of, stating that the trust had been properly administered and that all distributions were made in accordance with beneficiary needs. No numbers, no bank statements, no accounting. Priya recommended that we try to resolve this outside of court first, both to save money and to give my mother a chance to make it right without a public fight. We sent a formal demand letter requesting a full accounting within 30 days as required under trust law in our state. 30 days came and went. What came instead was a family intervention. My mother organized what she called a family meeting at my grandmother's house. I walked in to find 12 relatives sitting in a circle, and my mother, visibly emotional, telling the room that she was so scared I was spiraling and that I'd hired a lawyer to threaten her over money that had already been spent taking care of me my whole life. 12 faces turned to me. Not one of them asked to see a bank statement. All of them asked if I was okay. I left that house that night and did not speak to most of my extended family for almost 2 years. Here's where the story becomes an actual investigation, and I want to walk you through exactly how someone hides 11 years of financial exploitation from a family that trusts them completely. Because the mechanics matter. Mechanism 1: commingling. My mother never opened a separate, clearly labeled trust account. Instead, over the years, trust funds were deposited into and withdrawn from a joint personal account she shared with my stepfather. This is called commingling of funds, and it's one of the oldest tricks in financial fraud because it makes tracing money brutally difficult. You can't just look at the trust account, you have to reconstruct years of mixed transactions. Mechanism 2: vague or fabricated documentation. The shoebox ledger I mentioned earlier wasn't just sloppy, it was, we'd later argue, deliberately vague. Entries like family expenses, R's care, MISC, worded just specifically enough to look like record keeping and just vaguely enough to be unverifiable. Mechanism 3: the narrative shield. This is the one most true crime videos don't talk about because it's not a financial mechanism at all, it's a psychological. As long as the family believed I was the unreliable one, no forensic accountant, no attorney, no police report would ever get traction because nobody close to her would ever say under oath, yes, something changed. Yes, I noticed the spending. Yes, I'll cooperate with an investigation into her. She wasn't just hiding money, she was hiding it behind me. During the 2 years of silence, I did something my mother never expected. I stopped trying to convince my family, and I started building a case I wouldn't need their belief. Only evidence. I filed a records request with my late father's original bank, the one where the initial trust deposit was made in 2008. Banks are required to retain certain records for years, and while retrieval isn't instant, it's possible, especially with an attorney's request letter citing trustee obligations. 11 weeks later, an envelope arrived containing the original 2008 deposit slip and the account opening documents for the trust, documents that clearly named a separate trust-specific account number that had existed for the first 3 years, before it was quietly closed in 2011. My mother had closed the actual trust account and folded the remaining balance, at that time, roughly $198,000, into her personal joint account, not commingled by accident, closed and merged on a specific date by a specific signature, hers. That single piece of paper did something 12 family members and 6 years of gaslighting couldn't do. It made the story undeniable, in writing with a bank's letterhead on it. With that account closure document in hand, everything changed. Priya brought in a forensic accountant, a soft-spoken CPA named Martin Oyalaran, who specializes in tracing commingled funds, essentially following money through joint accounts to determine what belongs to whom even years after the fact, using bank statement subpoenas, transaction categorization, and expenditure pattern analysis. This is slow, expensive, methodical work. Forensic accounting on a case like this can run anywhere from $10,000 to $40,000 depending on complexity. Money I did not have. I want to be honest with you about that because most true crime channels skip the boring, terrifying part where the injured party has to figure out how to afford justice. I took out a personal loan. I sold my car. I moved back in with a roommate at 31 years old. I want you to understand, pursuing this cost me real, immediate money and stability on top of the money I'd already lost, because that is the actual price of accountability in a civil system that doesn't front the cost for you. Over the following 8 months, Martin's forensic report reconstructed 11 years of transactions across the joint account. What emerged wasn't just a story anymore, it was a spreadsheet. A $198,000 trust balance folded into the joint personal account in 2011. A kitchen renovation costing $61,400 in 2013. paid in 3 transfers from that account. The same month, my mother told the family she couldn't afford to help with my community college tuition. A 2016 vehicle purchase, an SUV, $38,750, paid in cash from the same account. Multiple international trips between 2014 and 2019, totaling roughly $22,000 in flights and resort charges. In years, I was specifically told the family couldn't afford to include me because of my situation. Ongoing, unexplained cash withdrawals averaging $900 a month for nearly a decade, totaling well over $90,000 with no corresponding receipts, invoices, or ledger detail beyond vague notations. Martin's final number, cross-referenced against the original trust principal, accrued theoretical investment growth had the fund simply been held in a basic index fund, which trustees are generally required to consider under something called the prudent investor rule, and unauthorized withdrawals came to $187,340 in direct losses, not even counting the lost investment growth the money would have earned if left untouched, which Martin separately estimated at another $61,000 to $74,000, depending on market assumptions. Here's something I didn't expect going in. Social media became one of our strongest evidentiary tools. My mother had posted publicly photos from the Cabo trip in 2018, captioned "Blessed to give this family everything." She'd posted the new kitchen in 2013 with a caption thanking my stepfather for working so hard for us. None of these posts mentioned a trust. None of them needed to, until we lined the dates up next to the forensic accounting report, and suddenly a decade of harmless-looking Facebook posts became a timeline of exactly where the money went, in her own words, with her own timestamps. We also carefully reached out to 2 relatives, not to convince them, but simply to ask if they'd be willing to speak with our attorney about specific memories. My Aunt Carol, who remembered the tuition conversation clearly, and my cousin Jamie, who still had text messages from my mother describing me as unstable, dated suspiciously close to each major financial request I had made over the years. Jamie, to her enormous credit, when she understood what the timeline actually showed, didn't hesitate. She turned over the texts. I won't pretend this was a clean, uninterrupted march to justice. There were 2 moments I thought it might all collapse. Near miss 1. 3 months into the forensic investigation, my mother's attorney sent notice that she intended to transfer the family home, held jointly with my stepfather, into a newly formed LLC, a common move to shield assets from an anticipated civil judgment. Priya moved fast, filing for what's called a lis pendens, a legal notice recorded against the property alerting any future buyer or lender that litigation affecting ownership was pending. It froze the transfer just in time. Near miss 2. My mother offered through her attorney an out-of-court settlement of $40,000, roughly a fifth of what forensic accounting showed was actually missing, with a non-disclosure agreement attached, meaning I would legally be barred from ever telling this story to my family or anyone else again. I said no. Not because $40,000 wasn't real money, because the number was never really the point anymore. The point was that for 11 years, she had let an entire family believe I was the unreliable one, and a quiet settlement with a gag order would let that version of events stand forever. I wasn't willing to trade the truth for a partial refund. With Martin's forensic report finalized and the account closure document as an anchor, Priya filed a civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and constructive fraud, and simultaneously, we filed a report with the local district attorney's economic crimes unit, since intentional misappropriation of trust funds by a fiduciary can rise to criminal theft, depending on the amount and intent. In our state, theft over $150,000 qualifies as a first-degree felony. Case number 2024/CR/04471. I remember it exactly, because it's the number that turned 11 years of "you're being paranoid" into a matter of public criminal record. Word travels fast in a big family, and once the civil suit was filed, a public record searchable by anyone, my mother could no longer control the story with a phone call. My Aunt Carol was the first to call me directly, not to ask if I was okay this time, but to ask, quietly, is it true? Is there really $187,000 missing? I didn't argue with her. I didn't try to convince her of anything. I told her the case number and told her she was welcome to request the public court filings herself. She did, and then she called my grandmother. Within 3 weeks, without me saying another word to most of them, the same family that once sat in a circle and asked if I was spiraling was asking my mother at her own kitchen table why there was a bank record showing a trust account closed in 2011 with her signature on it. For the first time in over a decade, she didn't have a room she controlled. The criminal case moved first. Faced with the forensic accounting report, the original account documents, and Jamie's preserved text messages establishing a pattern of preemptive character attacks timed to financial requests, my mother's criminal defense attorney negotiated a plea, guilty to felony theft by a fiduciary, with restitution as a central term of sentencing, and a probationary sentence in lieu of the maximum incarceration exposure, given her age and lack of prior record of fairly typical outcome in fiduciary theft cases, where the defendant has no criminal history and restitution is achievable. The civil case, running in parallel, resulted in a judgment of $187,340 in direct losses, plus $58,000 in prejudgment interest calculated under our state statutory rate, plus attorney's fees and forensic accounting costs, bringing the total judgment to just over $271,000. A judgment on paper isn't the same as money in the bank, and this is a part people rarely explain. We still had to collect. Priya's office recorded the judgment as a lien against the family home, the same one my mother had tried to shield in an LLC, and pursued a wage garnishment against my stepfather's income, since the funds had passed through their joint account and he was named as a co-defendant for unjust enrichment. Over the following 14 months, through the property lien, a court-ordered sale of the SUV purchase with trust funds, and structured garnishment, I recovered $214,000 of the $271,000 judgment. The remainder converted into a long-term payment plan the court would continue to enforce. I want to be honest here. I didn't do a big public call-out. I didn't post it on social media. The court record did the talking. The family did the talking. My mother's reputation as the family's emotional infrastructure didn't survive contact with a felony conviction and a public judgment, and it didn't need my help to fall. It fell under its own weight the moment people finally had documents instead of a narrative. Here's the part that still sits strangely with me. I always assumed if I ever found the truth, it would be something dramatic, an affair, a gambling debt, a secret second family. It wasn't. The forensic report was almost mundane in its answer. Kitchen renovations, vacations, a nicer car, ordinary cash withdrawals that just quietly funded a more comfortable life than my mother's actual income could support. There was no scandal, no secret. Just 11 years of a woman who decided, apparently without much internal conflict, that her son's inheritance was easier to spend than to protect, and that the fastest way to make sure nobody checked was to make sure nobody believed him if he asked. That, more than the dollar amount, is the part I still think about. I got my money, most of it, with the rest coming in monthly. I rebuilt an emergency fund. I moved the recovered funds into accounts held in 3 separate financial institutions, with my own attorney holding limited documented authority, not blind trust, over anything involving family finances again. I talk to about half my extended family now, the half who, once they had the actual documents in front of them, apologized, some of them more than once. My mother and I do not speak. If there's one thing I want you to take from this video, it's this. Financial abuse inside families rarely looks like a stranger draining your bank account. It looks like someone you trust. Controlling the paperwork, controlling the narrative, and quietly making sure that if you ever do ask questions, the people around you will doubt you before they doubt them. Here are the warning signs if you're watching this and something feels familiar. A trustee, family member, or power of attorney holder who resists or delays providing account statements, or a formal accounting, especially when you're legally entitled to one. Vague or inconsistent record keeping. Categories like family expenses or MISC instead of receipts, invoices, or itemized statements. Commingled accounts. Money that should be separate and clearly designated being mixed into a personal or joint account. A pattern where your questions about money get reframed as a symptom of instability, ingratitude, or an attack, rather than answered directly. The person controlling the money also quietly becoming the person controlling what other relatives think of you. Major personal purchases by the fiduciary that line up suspiciously with periods when you were told there wasn't enough money for you. If you're in a position like the one I was in, get the document first before you confront anyone. Request a formal accounting in writing. Consult an estate or trust litigation attorney. Many offer free or low-cost initial consultations. And know that a forensic accountant, while expensive, can turn a decade of "I have a bad feeling" into a case number that a court, and eventually a family, has to take seriously. You are allowed to ask where the money went. Asking that question does not make you the unstable one. Have you ever been the unreliable one in a family conflict that turned out to be about money the whole time? Tell me what happened in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, this community has helped me find language for things I didn't have words for until I started making these videos. If this story mattered to you, subscribe for next week's case, and I'll see you then.